So I was a senior pastor, and but how I got there is I was a youth pastor, and our senior pastor, I was a really good friend with, he ended up passing away at age 37, left 2 kids, and I was the only guy on staff. And so we had, he just died of a heart attack. I was at a youth event and got a notice that our senior pastor had passed away. And so anyway, trying to keep that church together and trying to navigate the waters between the financial side of it, because the church had given the pastor and his wife about $40,000 to buy a house, and on the contingency that when he went to another church that he would sell the house and then they would repay the money. Well, when the pastor passed away, they had that $40,000 debt, and you can imagine the people in that church, they wanted that money back so they could get a new pastor in to help him. And then so it was a real mess, but I stand here firsthand to say this is a real issue. So anyway, our purpose for today is, hey Jared, they're going to take your blood pressure and they're going to make sure you're not going to pass out on us again. So anyway, our purpose here today, we've structured this in 2 ways. The first section is going to be, we're talking about ministry. How do we boost and make it easier financially in a church? Now, some people, that's not a concern at all. I mean, you guys don't have a concern. You have some people in your church that are good givers. You've been teaching that. So, but what we want to do is try to give you some strategies and some ideas on how to structure the finances in the church. We have a full office of people that are constantly playing in this space, working with other churches and those kind of things. We'll give you some ideas as we go along. But in the setup to this, we want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the head trash that we all carry about money. And we all have head trash about some aspect of money. There's a lot of research done on this, and pastors are not outside of this. One of the first things that some pastors think is money is bad. It's a bad thing. And you can kind of tell this by people. It's because and I see this every once in a while with pastors. It's like they just don't want to even talk about it. If you're the type of people that don't want to talk about money, you may have that kind of head trash going in. You don't want to even discuss it. You don't like talking about budgets. As budget issues at church come up, you don't like talking about it. It's kind of one of those things, God's going to take care of it. So if you have that kind of head trash, it's something that you're going to want to keep in mind as you go through. Let me back up here and get finished what Jared was going to say. This is also another thing, that rich people are either greedy or they're corrupt. I just reading a book this on the way here. This guy had a bad experience with his dad because he started making some money, and then he went to do something with his dad, and his dad just ostracized him because I cannot hang out with people like you that are so corrupt. You're taking advantage of people. And there are some people in your church that are going to think this way. It's like they see wealthy people in a bad light. And so it tailors the way that you carry on this. It's also a philosophy, too, that it's good to live with less money. It's almost a pauper mentality. I remember going to Bible college, and it's a badge of honor to be poor. And it's something that you can see biblical justification for that. But there's also biblical justification for people that are wealthy in the Bible. And if you go through and you start looking at that, it's pretty easy for you to see people who are wealthy in the Bible, and they actually help the ministry go forward. You think about Lydia, seller of purple. You look at Solomon, for that matter. You look at some of the very wealthy people in the Bible that actually allowed the ministry to go forward. So this is prevalent in our thing. We have to address this as we go on. There's also a passage, blessed are the poor who are poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. That's not an indictment against money. It's more of a blessing that comes to people that don't have any resources. An indication that you may think that money is bad is you tend to overspend due to poor budget or management. So there's some people that when they get money, they spend it right away because they don't feel like they deserve having it. If you are the type of person that spends money as soon as you get it, then this may be one of the issues that you deal with. Is you can't figure out how to do it. You don't feel like you deserve it. So you've got to get rid of it as soon as you can, or you give it away as soon as you can. They do self-sabotaging of their own personal finances. And this is a flavoring that comes in and is prevalent in our churches. So another perspective on it is that on the other side of it is they are money worshipers. And the thing that this drives is money can buy happiness. So the underlying tone is that they believe money, if I just get a little bit more money, I'll be a little bit happier. If I just get that new set of golf clubs, I'll just be a little bit happier. If I just get that new car, I'll be a little bit happier. And all my problems would be solved if I had more money. I'm not satisfied with how much money I have and I'm making. I need to push myself to work a little bit harder. The thing where this spins off is I'm a workaholic. I just need to do a little bit more, a little bit more. The type of people that are in this category tend to be, they have multiple jobs. They may be in a pastoral setting, they may be pastoring, they don't make enough money here and they don't have the guts enough to ask the church to pay them. And so they go out and get another job and another job. And in many ways, that's the way I was. My very first ministry, I ended up buying some rental properties, and fortunately, God used it in a great way in my life. But I know one of the things that drove me in the beginning stages to pursue other things, I just didn't have enough money, I felt like, to make a way in it. And so I ended up working too much and almost crashing a lot of things in my own life. And then you prioritize work above all, and it mainly focused on money. You buy things that make you feel happy. It's like that you're constantly going after this. So this is an indication that this is a problem, that you're constantly buying things and your credit card is often out of whack. Your credit card debt is crazy. And these are the problems that we're going to need to be aware of with people in their churches. The other thing is we tend to think of money as a statistical thing or a status thing. I need to own the latest and greatest and most popular thing. Now, in financial world, this is my world that I live in. I meet a lot with all kinds of clients, and I can always tell the people that come in and they're using money as a status symbol. So they're having the latest and greatest cars. So when we sit down and we do a financial analysis, one of the things that we start asking is what kind of car do you have? What's your car strategy? How big is it? And then obviously we talk about the houses and what's your strategy for that. You always tell these people because they always got to have the newest and the best and the greatest. And this is a real problem because their wealth or their worth is found in their wealth. And this tends to be an issue, and it's impacting our church, and many times comes into a pastoral situation. These pastors typically have to have the greatest and nicest things. They also wear fancy designer clothes, or they drive the nicest car. And the root problem here is that they equate their self-worth with their net worth. And the bigger the net worth, the bigger issue it is. And where this comes into play also in a church setting is as we have people here, they will try to manipulate the giving in a church because they want everything to be the nicest and the best and things like that. The counter to that is everything is second rate. There's no style. There's no pizzazz. I mean, I can hear some people in the church, in a church, let's say we were going to build something like this. I can hear some of the people in our churches who have that mentality that money is bad necessarily, and they would be embarrassed to see a place like this. And then there's other people that would say they would be embarrassed to be in a place like this because it's not as nice as it could be. So there's a balance here that we as pastors need to kind of coach our people through, especially when you go through new issues and new things. So there's great arguments on both sides, however, but on the other hand, I think what we're obviously going to push for is a biblical example of it is let's present something that is honorable to God and push it forward. But these these ideas, these perspectives on money impact us on all levels. They tend to these type of people who are into status, they don't mind putting things on credit. But the answer to that is live within your means. And so then the other one is money vigilant. They need to save more to feel secure about my future. That's kind of what the undertow here is in their life. They could spend my money on things or experiences that I would enjoy, but I'd rather save in order to, in case things go south. That's probably a bigger issue. quick story here. I was serving as an interim pastor in Sully, Iowa. A little tiny church, about 50 people. I was just going in and trying to fill the pulpit as they were looking and transitioning through to another pastor. And budget time came up, and so we started working with them and putting their budgets together. And lo and behold, little tiny church, about 50 people. And as we were looking through a budget, it came to light that they had like a $1.2 million cushion wrapped up in a CD. And it's like, well, why are we saving that money? Why? My philosophy has always been, if God gives money to a church, he expects us to use it in the community to reach people for Christ. And so when I started saying that, well, we couldn't do that because something might happen. What about this? What about this? And the leaders of that church were starting to say, well, what if we need a new roof? Well, I can guarantee you we could not have spent $1.2 million on a new roof. And really what the problem here is their bankroll was the real issue. They were putting their faith in the money that they had. Now, you might be sitting there, boy, I wish I had that problem. Well, maybe so, but the thing is it's a problem one way or another. And trying to teach people how to spend money is as much as a problem to teach people how to save money and to earn money. It's a problem on either one. There's an interesting book, if you're inclined. It's written by a secularist, so I can't talk to his religious philosophy, but I am intrigued with his philosophy of money. It's called Die with Zero. And basically what the philosophy is in that book is that once you take care of everything, you make sure you prepare well for the future, you prepare well for and use what God has given to you to prepare well. And then the second phase of it is you spend lavishly. And the object of the game is to die with zero. Now, I made the mistake of having my wife read that book, so she took that quite literally, quite seriously. So it's been kind of an issue, but it's an interesting read. If you like that kind of thing, I would encourage you to get that book because it teaches you and gives you another perspective. Why am I saving all this money? And we'll talk about in tomorrow's session about a key component of really maximizing what God has given to us. And a key component of that is just be a good saver. God honors savings. But there are some people that are hoarders, and that's equally a problem. So we have people that don't save at all. They don't prepare well for the future. They throw their hands up and they say, well, God's going to take care of me. And that's hard for me to argue against because there is an element of truth. But there's also an element of truth that says God expects us to prepare for the future. And so that is through saving. I mean, you can't escape those passages in the Bible that talks about being a good saver. So we need to be a good saver. But we don't need to be a hoarder. God expects us to use the money he's resourced us to bring glory and honor to him. If you're not doing that, you don't have a plan for it, then it probably needs to be readjusted. I've saved a lot already, but I don't feel like it's enough. It's always interesting when I run into clients like this, and I see they have a good savings, which we always enjoy working with these people because it's something we can work with. But the other thing is when you ask them this question is how much is enough? How much is enough? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $2 million? And of course, the typical response is, well, you tell me. To which my response is, no, you tell me, when are you going to be satisfied? Because if you come in with $100,000 of savings and you're trying to go into retirement with that amount of money, we could probably figure out something. But on the other hand, if you're not satisfied with where you're at in life, it'll never be enough. So, what's your perspective on your money because it's going to flow over into your church. This is the type of person that hoards wealth out of fear and lack of trust. Now, if your people in your church are of this mindset, it's always going to be hard for you to initiate new activity. It's going to be hard for you to broaden your missions. It's going to be harder to get people where they need to be as far as the gospel, and if they're of that hoarder's mentality. So what I would encourage you to do, make sure you have a balanced approach and make sure you have a biblical approach and don't be afraid to spend money. So I feel like in a Dutch community, I have to say that. Anyway. Enjoy your hard-earned money. That's the reason why God gives it to us, and is to enjoy it, to save it, and spend it, and enjoy it to bring glory and honor to him. I think it's one of the things that he asks of us, to to make sure. And it really does come down to having a plan. Having a plan is key to maximizing what God has given to us. So we need to make sure that we are consistent in developing a plan. Strategies toward developing a giving church. So I've written here several things that, this is nothing new. You've probably heard a lot of this already. But I think it goes without saying. We need to follow some of these principles. And if you break down on any of them, it's going to be hard for you to develop the ministry to bring glory and honor and have the resources in your church that you have. I don't know what your church situation is. Some churches struggle with finances consistently, and then some people blame it on the community. Well, our church is located in a community that doesn't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of business. We don't have a lot of givers, those kind of things. I happen to believe that whatever God has called you to do, God will provide the resources, and it's up to your creativity to make that happen. And it begins with some of these principles. Principle number one, it begins with integrity. Need to be able to walk with integrity as far as the resources go. People with money do not tend to give their money away and give to ministries like ours if they feel like it's not being used wisely. So I like always saying, especially for new pastors, one of the first things we would encourage you to do anytime you take a new pastor, one of the things I would encourage you to negotiate as you go into a new pastorate is insist on an audit. Now, some people don't like having an audit. Now, I managed a multi-million-dollar federal grant, and one of the things that they make you do is every year they make you do a yellow book audit. It's not one of the highest level audits that's out there. And so when you go through this audit, somebody will come in, they'll do a search, a detailed search on all the bills and where the flows money is going in and those kind of things. Now, I'm not encouraging it. It'll cost you about 15 to 20 grand. The last one I did was about 20 grand to have an auditing firm come in and do it. But when they come back, they will analyze every single thing, and they'll be able to say, you're doing it absolutely right. You account for all the money. And then they'll also, when it comes to in a church's role, they'll talk about how the money comes in, where does it go, who handles it, are there any frailties and any faults. And they'll give a nice detailed report. Now, as church leaders, one of the things I always encourage you to do not let people see that willy-nilly. Don't make it available to everybody in the congregation, because you never know what kind of information is and how it could be interpreted. But you, as a church leader, need to know what's going on in your church. Now, the reason why I say this is because there's probably a half a dozen stories in my background where churches, and you think everybody's great in your church, churches are filled with sinners who tend to steal. And you think, oh no, this guy is great, or this lady is great, I trust our bookkeeper. Those are the people that tend, and I'm not trying to create a story in your mind where, oh no, you're going to second guess everyone, but it happens. My dad was an executive with AT&T. He was a vice president with them. He went into retirement, went down to Florida, was going nuts, driving us all crazy because he didn't have anything to do. A church got a hold of him and asked him to come in and be the business manager. And that was a mistake. I told the pastor that was a huge mistake. You should have never asked my dad to do that, because he's very precise, very anal when it comes to handling things in a detailed way. 4 years later, the missions pastor, who everybody in town loved, who everybody had great respect for, they pinned on him over $365,000 that he's been embezzling from the missions fund. Now, you can imagine what happened when all that broke, because this dear pastor that everybody loved, and Dad shows them in black and white the credit card statements that bought the diamond ring for his wife. He shows him the trips that he took to colleges, Christian colleges, that he put on the church's bill. And for 3 or 4 years, that's all the farther he went. And you can imagine the stuff that was going on in the community, because there was a whole bunch of people in that church that wanted to call the county prosecutor. That would have never happened unless Dad went through and said, let's take a look. Very first thing he did, we're going to do an audit right here from the very beginning, and we're going to do it. My first case with this was our pastor died. And so I'm not knowing what to do. I called my dad, what should I do? He said, well, very first thing, call the CPA, ask for an audit. Because if there was problems before you came, you don't want that on your record, if for no other reason. So we did. Sure enough, caught the lady, our bookkeeper, who everybody loved, caught her with about $35,000. And at the end of it, at the resolution meeting, before we took it to the court, which we weren't going to do, she had the gall to ask for her calculator because she loved her calculator. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like you're fighting for not paying us back, but you fought for the calculator, for a $20 calculator. It's like, I hope you hear me well. If you're a youth pastor and you have funds, insist on an audit on some level. It's totally worth it. You never know what's out there, and people are sinners. Second point on walk with integrity, be a giver and insist that your leaders are givers as well. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this point. I hang out with a lot of pastors, and so I just did an informal survey. Do you know what your leadership team gives, your deacons, elders? Do you know what your leadership? About half of them do. They know what their leaders are doing. And the other half, they don't want to know at all, which I kind of feel intrigued. I'm on the leadership team now at our church. It's a church of about 1,000. And I got a note from our business manager, and he says, Mike, here's your giving for this year. Thanks for being a part of the mission and all that. And it was a subtle way of him telling me, Mike, I know what you're giving, and I'm glad you're doing your part. And then we get an overall report. The average Sunday school teacher in our church gives this amount. Doesn't name them by name. And at first I felt uncomfortable about that because I came from a background that says nobody should know what it is. But now I'm swinging the other way. If we're going to be leaders, we need to hold ourselves up and be a leader and not to brag about it. Like, I'm not sure what. But I was intrigued by what one pastor told me this week. Hey, we just went through a giving, and I'll give you a strategy here that he does here in a little bit. But what he says, whenever we go into this giving campaign, he'll stand up very humbly and he'll set the table this way. He says, hey, I know this is a sacrifice for all of us. This is something God has laid on us as a leadership team and as a church. I want you to know we're committed to giving 25% above and beyond what we normally give for this project. So when he says that to me, it's just like, yeah, that's what we should be doing. If the people in your church don't know what you're giving, I'm not so concerned about the amount that you're giving, but they ought to know that you are in it to win it as well. If you're asking them to be givers and you're not giving, what's the definition of a hypocrisy? So hold yourself up with some integrity, be proud of what you're doing, and don't ask your people to do anything more than what you're committed to do too. And people will naturally gather around that. People who with greater means than you will naturally surround themselves because they want to know. Like, for instance, when I sit down and we give advice as far as, hey, you ought to try this mutual fund, or you ought to try this annuity, or you ought to try this life insurance product, or you ought to try this real estate investment or something like that. One of the first questions most investors ask of me, what do you win? If I don't have that life insurance policy, if I don't have that annuity, or if I don't have that mutual fund, they're kind of like, why would I buy a Ford from a Chevy dealer? It's like, that's an honest question. And so it is with people in our church. If people in your church don't see you getting skin in the game, why should they? This is a bigger problem than what a lot of people know. You think, well, I'm sacrificing. I'm working so hard. I don't get paid enough. And that's my gift. You tell that to somebody that's working at a grocery store at minimum wage. And you're asking them to give sacrificially to have this mission go forward, and you don't have skin in the game, it's no wonder we have trouble raising enough funds. So be careful about this. Make sure you walk with integrity. Then set up your financial team with givers. If you have any control of who is setting up the financial strategies in your church, you want to make sure that you have givers on that financial team. You don't want penny pinchers on that. So right now this year it looks like our budget is going to be like 1.2 in our church, and it's really grown a lot. And I was just talking to one of the guys, and on that financial team, and we stay out of it. I mean, as an out leadership team, we don't get into nitpicking, but we put together a group of guys who we know are big givers. They're not manipulative either in their giving. And so I was just talking to the other day, and so he goes through the whole process on how they project, where the first step on budgeting is you set up how much you feel God's asking you to set the budget. You come up with a big number, and then from there you peel it out. And then the second thing that you do is you set salaries. So that's where we're at right now. And as I was talking to him, it was like, all right, where do you think we go? And I've been in two different situations, or seeing two different contrasts here. One, when you get a group of givers, this is the way the angle goes. We look at our past history, we think we're going to be at, let's say, $1 million for our budget this year. And the others say, oh man, we can't. The first response is, we think you're going to be at $1 million, but let's only budget for $900,000. That's one side. The other side is, yeah, we think we're only going to bring in about $1 million this year. Let's see if we can go 1.2. Two totally different aspects. One is looking forward, and they're giving in the stuff they really anticipating what God is. So the simple point here is if you have an opportunity to put your financial team together, and I know you do, you're the leader of the church, right? So you get a chance to put those people together. Find natural givers, people that have a proper perspective on their money. Next thing is be intentional. Be intentional. I love Todd Stiles. If you know Todd Stiles, he's in the Midwest, great preacher. He's just now starting to write, great teacher, great ministry. And if he was sitting here today, I would go out with lunch and I would say this to Todd. Todd, I spoke at the seminar, and you know what my complaint about you was? I love you as a brother. I've hired you. I've had your family over at my house, but your problem in ministry, you refuse to talk about money and stewardship. So think back, when was the last time you talked about stewardship? You don't have to talk about giving. Talk about stewardship. Now, where this came to light is at our church, we're having a problem, and one guy, it's driving him crazy that he's not getting his way. Big giver. He sent us all on the leadership team an email this week, and at the end of it, he said, I'm going to pull my funding if you don't change this. Now, what does that say about his perspective on stewardship? It's manward. It's totally self-centering, and he has a total bad perspective. I attribute that to a lack of preaching from the pulpit and teaching from the pulpit on what stewardship is and about the things we own. So here's my point. Be intentional about this. Now, the one church I was at and served on was great. Every year, January or February, he spent 4 weeks talking about not giving, but stewardship. What's the difference? Giving speaks about giving cash. Stewardship is giving everything. Your time, your money, your effort. Now, this is one of the nice things, and people have brought us in to talk about those kind of things. We can do a Friday night, Saturday morning thing. We've also done that where we've come in and we've talked to the leadership team. If you don't want to ask for a raise, we would love to come in and ask for a raise for you. Teach the leadership team on how to structure a retirement plan and those kind of things. We would love to do that. And typically people, once they get it and they hear it from somebody else, they're much more open to it. Sometimes it doesn't work, because given the natural thing. But if you're the type of guy who feels uncomfortable about asking for more money, why not bring somebody else in, an expert that says, hey, this is what's standard in the industry, here's what you're expected to do, and we would love to do that. And feel like that's one of the things that God is called to do. But if you're not intentional and speaking regularly about it, then maybe that's the reason why what God is trying to tell you to do is teach people about everything that they own. It's about lordship of Jesus Christ in their life. And so I want to encourage you to do that. Be intentional. Next thing is be creative. You get brownie points for being creative on this kind of stuff if you do it in a lighthearted way. Now in our town, right across town, they had a multi-bazillion dollar building fund going on. Clearly over the top. And because of it, every week they had some pretty high financial requirements of that building. And so what ended up happening is every week the pastor or somebody from leadership was talking about standing up and talking about money and how much they needed money and things like that. They really put themselves under behind it. And because of that, we picked up probably 25, 30 families just because they got tired of talking about money. When they came over, which spins off to one of the reasons why a pastor doesn't like talking about money. So he's fallen out of the canoe the other side. But be creative with it. Everybody has a different way, and I know in some of these Dutch communities that it really is squirrely. It's kind of different. You deal with some things that we don't have to deal with in the Midwest. But anyway, you get brownie points for being creative. So I want to do this in two ways. So be thinking of some of the creative things that you've heard of, that people have done, ways to raise money, and try to encourage people and then teach about stewardship. There's a couple that come to my mind. I had the opportunity to speak in front of a group of church leaders, and it was in a setting very much like this. And I was teaching on the Luke passage that talks about the stewardship, the minas, and one got 1, one got 5, one got 10. And so before I started, it was just like this. I stood up and I said, hey, I've got a $1, a $5, and a $10. Somebody raise a hand. And if you'd be willing to play with this, I'm going to give you one of these. And so a bunch of people raised their hand. And so I went to the one guy and I said, all right, here's $1, here's $5, here's $10. Now, in the next half hour, you have to go throughout this campus and you have to trade up, okay? And let's see how you do, okay? You can't talk to anybody in this room, but just go out and bring back whatever you trade up. And then they left, and I said, you got to be back in 45 minutes. And then when I got done speaking, so while they were gone, I ended up teaching on that passage and talked about the 3 different ways that people invest their money and things like that. They left, and sure enough, they came back. One guy came back with a little stuffed animal. One guy didn't do anything, which follows exactly what's in that passage. He was nervous. He didn't see anybody that he knew, so he literally sat on a park bench and waited for the 45 minutes. Which fit the passage perfectly. Because if you remember that passage, that's what one guy does. The other guy, he found and brought back a little trinket animal. The other guy was off the chart, crazy excited. And he could not wait to tell what he got. So he's standing, he didn't have anything on him. So one guy tells nothing, next guy shows this, everybody cheered for him. Next guy, he says, okay, you think you guys did good. Let me tell you what happened. I went out there was a guy out there, he was talking to the executive director. And so I walked up to him and I said, hey, I got this little thing. I got $5 here. I'm looking to trade up. And so the guy looked at the executive director, and he looks at the guy, and he says, here, and hands him a set of car keys to his old Cadillac. He said, can I really have this? He says, yeah, absolutely, you can have that. Are you serious? Yeah, I'll sign it over to you. He says, yeah, go. So he brought back, I got me a Cadillac. So anyway, long story short, what happened is the guy ended up giving it back to the camp, and that's what was happening anyway, but it made for a great story. So anyway, where I got that idea from was there was a guy that did that literally in a church. So he was going to preach on that passage, and for the next 2 months, they had this giving campaign on something, but he structured it this way. I found somebody in our church that would give $100. So I've got $100 bills. I got 100 $1 bills. That's it. He says, who wants one? On the commitment that you're going to go out and make an investment. And in 2 months, I'm going to ask you to come back and show us what you got and see how God has blessed you. Now, it wasn't so much that they brought, but they brought in like $10,000. I mean, it was like a great time of celebration for them because it was, but he was very careful on how you do that. If you choose to take this idea and run with it, you got to be really careful. It's about giving of yourself. So every turn they were teaching about giving of yourself and investing in the community, investing in God's community, investing to see people come to know Christ. And when you can do those kind of things, it's amazing. So that's one idea. Here's another idea that we've done, and it's worked amazing. Some churches have done this consistently every year ever since. Long about the fall, harvest time, big deal in Iowa. Pastor would say, hey, we're trying to knock out our debt. We're trying to knock out our building debt. I'd like to propose something to you. I'm going to ask that we give 1 month of a mortgage payment to this giving program. Would you consider giving whatever your mortgage payment in that 1 month to help us knock out our mortgage here? every year, it goes off the chart crazy good as people consider that, as they consider giving it. You get brownie points for being creative. So there's an idea for that. There's all kinds of things that you can do. You guys have any ideas that maybe we can steal from your situation that might be helpful to other people? Anybody got anything? Nothing. Yes?
For years, we've done what we call a harvest dinner praise offering.
Yep.
And it started with a matching gift, so the pastor himself was in big time.
Yep.
Then he went to a person who he knew could give significantly, and they put together a matching gift.
Yep.
And then, the church did that together.
Yep.
Over the years, that's grown, and people have kind of gotten the bug to give.
Yep.
And so now it's just, we know every harvest time we're going to have this offering.
Yep.
And it's one of the best worship nights
Yep.
of the year.
Yep. It is. If you're not doing something like this, you're missing the boat. And something that God can really accelerate and advance the cause to his kingdom. How am I doing on time? Oh, man. Yeah. Are you okay? All right, come on up.
So I'm a middle child, and I always found ways to get attention growing up, and this is about the best way I could have done it, right? Thanks for the help, everybody. On the road and too much caffeine with nothing to eat and a baby, so I didn't sleep last night. So just that. Just to close this out here real quick, one of the last things that Mike talks about here is calling an expert. One of the things that Mike and I, obviously, we're here. We have a big heart for ministry. This is something that's really, really important to us. Being able to walk alongside pastors and ministries and do our part for the cause of Christ in everybody else's ministries. We love to have a part in that. And so that's something that we're definitely willing to do, to come to churches, to do some of the things that we talked about, to look into church finances, help build these things. You can see we work with budgeting, setting salaries, helping churches figure out, hey, how do we pay our people? And not just how do we pay our people, but how do we set our people up for the future, retirement packages, things like that churches don't really think, either they don't think about it or they don't think they have the ability to do that. So that's one of the things that we help do. And then just working with your congregation. How are ways that we can help your congregation, whether on an individual level so that they can give the church more? How do we teach the congregation not just to give, but how to give? And there are some ways that we walk with churches to help teach their congregations how to give. Again, use the QR code on the screen. We want to give all these books away. They're great just to have. They're really helpful to have all those passwords, account numbers set aside in a place where those are readily available. I just want to close this in prayer real quick, and look forward to getting to talk to each and every one of you a little bit more throughout the conference.